Good morning to you and happy Juneteenth. It is Friday, June 19th, and today is a holiday. In fact, it's a state holiday in 46 of our states, and it might be one that you are not that familiar with. A few years ago, I wasn't that familiar with this holiday, but this is a day that we call Juneteenth. And it's a very significant holiday in the history of the United States, and it's significant in the conversations and discussions that are happening today. On this day in 1865, the truths and the hope and the freedom of the Emancipation Proclamation that was signed 2.5 years prior were finally declared in Texas. And finally, after 2.5 years of already been declared free, slaves were finally emancipated. Can you imagine celebrating the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation that declares you no longer can be held as a slave, and yet for 2.5 more years, that reality exists in your life because it has not officially been made public and established in the place that you would be held. And so Juneteenth is indeed a time of celebration, that the Declaration of Independence that declares all men are created equal is actually a reality for not just the whites in the country, but also the Black and brown brothers and sisters around the world. And so today is Juneteenth. It's a day that many of us never learned about in school, which is indeed a tragedy. You know, I was reflecting on this day that it indeed is a day of celebration, but it isn't a day where we can say we have arrived. All was well that June 19th in 1865, is it? In fact, the very discussions and protests and marches that are occurring today in many cities around the world, and specifically around the United States, are declaring that the truths and the hope that were established and promoted by the Emancipation Proclamation, we haven't yet arrived at. And so on this day, on June 19th, rather than fill the air with my words, I want to take some time to read the words of Martin Luther King. I want to read to you some excerpts from his letter that he wrote from the Birmingham jail, written to Christian leaders, his brothers who were serving in the church. It is an incredible letter that I would encourage you to read the entirety of, but I will read some excerpts. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow provincial outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I'm sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. I am sure that none of you would want to rest content with the superficial kind of social analysis that deals merely with effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward gaining political independence, but we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen the vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will, and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your Black brothers and sisters, When you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society. When you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech tammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?" When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored. When you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and are plagued with inner fears and outer resentments. When you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain for civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. Lamentably, it is a historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture. But as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I've yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who had not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I've heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always met never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. I must make 2 honest confessions to you, my Christian brothers. First, I must confess that over the past years, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I've almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than the absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. I had hoped that the white moderate would see this need. Perhaps I was too optimistic. Perhaps I expected too much. I suppose I should have realized that few members of the oppressor race can understand the deep groans and passionate yearnings of the oppressed race, and still fewer have the vision to see that injustice must be rooted out by a strong, persistent, and determined action. He concludes with this. I hope this letter finds you strong in the faith. I also hope that circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each of you, not as an integrationist or a civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergyman and a Christian brother. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away, and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. These are the words of Martin Luther King, written from the Birmingham jail. And we could simply switch out a few names and places and dates. And I think they ring true today. May we educate ourselves today on the realities of what Juneteenth is all about. Indeed, a day of freedom that we all should celebrate. And then may we heed the words of Martin Luther King and listen and respond and recognize that we have indeed much work to do before indeed all men have the opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness at the same levels as others. God bless you.